This sketch is of Washington International Airport, and airports are a great place to start your sketching adventure because you're usually having to wait for at least an hour. By the time I got settled, I think I had just under an hour to draw and paint this time, and I hadn't drawn for a couple of days, and planes are pretty tricky. So I spent most of my time on the drawing itself, and I ran out of time for the painting, but generally I'm pretty happy with it. I just didn't get a chance to fill in this, and that's where the location and date is going to go. Next is one that you've already seen. It's from Las Vegas, and it's from the Strip in Las Vegas, where there's this just mess of different landmarks from around the US and other just crazy stuff like a roller coaster and big buildings and a mock-off of or rip-off of the Chrysler Building and the Statue of Liberty. It just screamed Las Vegas to me, so I wanted to capture that moment. It's just really over the top and just like a million things going on. I'm not so happy with the sketch itself. Like I said before, I think I had to draw it in less than 20 minutes, and there's a lot of different details there. And then I had probably only about 10 minutes for the painting, so I just slapped on one quick layer of color. And hopefully I'll get back to that as well, but if not, at least I've got some sort of memory there. After just one day in Las Vegas, we drove directly to the Grand Canyon, and this is the first sketch that I did there. It's from a place called Mather's Point, but I didn't know that at the time, and we were staying at a little town just outside of the South Rim called Tusayan, I guess is how you pronounce it. And so I did a panorama view here, and I think I had about an hour for both drawing and painting here, with a lot of distractions because there was a little squirrel that was running up to me constantly trying to see what I was doing. I think he thought my paints were food, and maybe he also wanted to drink from my water cup, so I had to keep shooing this little squirrel away. But this part here is the lookout location. Many people first see from the South Rim when they first visit the Grand Canyon, and so there's a couple of people there at the lookout looking out over to the canyon there. This bit didn't work so well. It's a little rock, more than a little rock, it's a huge boulder that's wedged in here, but mostly it gives me the vibe of what I first encountered, and it really is so overwhelming. If you've never been to the Grand Canyon, your first view of it is just unbelievably majestic and overwhelming, and it just seems to go on forever, and it goes so deep, it's just breathtaking. So I wanted to try to capture some idea of the size of it. Later on in the same day, we took a hike along the South Rim and stopped around sunset to draw and paint this sketch that you can see here. And I didn't finish this one either. I only had, I think, 30 minutes this time. And again, by the time I do the line work and the inking of it, that gives me very little time to get the paints in. And of course you need some drying time before you walk away, so I only got one layer on. I would have liked maybe 2 or 3 layers. But I like the vibe that I've gotten here. All the rich yellows and ochre tones and kind of reds of the sunset at the Grand Canyon. It's also surprisingly difficult to sketch the Grand Canyon. There's just so many landmarks and features. Simplifying it is I found it tricky to do. But this one, I think, it has a kind of nice vibe to it. And then the next day, I found a little stamp at one of the book shops or one of the locations. There's a whole bunch of different spots around the South Rim where you can get stamps. These stamps made me miss the stamps that you find in Japan. The stamps in Japan are so fantastic and just so intricate and always designed so superbly, but even just having something with the date is great. I might show you some from Japan though. Okay, so here is, in comparison, a stamp from Japan. This center part is the stamp itself, and I had a cool blue ink with it, and then I had space left around the page, so I drew in a bunch of different birds and flowers and then colored in the border area with my Copic markers. So a huge difference here compared to, you know, this little stamp here. So I think the rest of the world has a lot to learn from Japanese stamps. I'll just show you a couple others. Okay, these are also stamps from Japan. This one was a purple stamp and this one's a green stamp, both from Mikimoto Pearl Island. But then I put them in my little watercolor sketchbook, and then I've used watercolors on top of those stamps. But you can see that they're pretty incredibly detailed stamps all on their own. Another stamp, this one is from Matsumoto Castle, and I've colored over it here. And that's the cool thing about Japanese stamps, you can enhance them. Okay, and also from another sketchbook, some stamps from, I think these were from Nara, and then, yeah, this one's also from Nara. This is a typical stamp that you'll find at one of the railway stations. So pretty much every location in Japan will have a stamp, especially if it's a shrine, a temple, a tourist attraction, but even train stations will have their own stamps. Okay, so let's get back to the Grand Canyon. So this was a sunset sketch. Then the next day, we went for an early morning hike, and the light was spectacular and almost no one was around. So big pro tip if you're visiting the Grand Canyon, go really early in the morning. We got up and left around 5:30, 6 a.m. and it was great, a start to the day. As soon as we opened the door, there was a giant elk standing right outside our hotel room, munching away at a shrub. And then the hike was also spectacular. I think I only saw like 3 people over 2 hours of hiking. Okay, next up is also another panorama. I don't like this sketch at all. Again, it was a big rush sketch, but I wanted to show you it anyway because I think it's important to realize that you're going to have some failed sketches, and it's a sketchbook and you can make mistakes in it. So this is from a great location, Desert View, and actually they're one of the few places that has a really cool stamp. So you can see here, this stamp is actually better than my sketch. So there are sometimes a couple of places where you can get cool stamps, even in the USA, but most of the time the stamps are more like this one here, which is just the location and the date. But it was cool to see that I think they had 6 actual design stamps. And so this one's unfinished too, and a bunch of people were gathering at the cliff of Desert View. It's a great place to watch the sunset for the Grand Canyon. And there's this spectacular stone tower that you can climb up. I think you have to get there before like 6 p.m. to go inside, so make sure you get there early. This center area is because paint and water leaked through from a different sketch page and then ruined it, but it doesn't really matter because this sketch is both unfinished and quite ugly. Or at least in my opinion, it's quite ugly. Okay, I also showed you this large sketchbook that I took with me. It's A4 size, but in landscape positioning, and it's a Moleskine watercolor sketchbook, and I only ended up getting one painting done in it, and this is it here. I had about an hour to spend, and I focused mainly on this part of it, but again, it's an incomplete sketch, and it also was one of the places where I found a cool stamp. The next sketch is from Horseshoe Canyon in Page, Arizona. The day was incredibly hot, and you also have to hike a fair way up and down some sandy hills to get to this viewpoint. So I didn't have too much time and energy to draw and paint there. And we also were going to a tour at Antelope Slot Canyon. That was the main reason we were visiting Page in Arizona. And I really recommend, if you can find the time to get there, that Antelope Slot Canyon adventure tour is just amazing. You don't have time on that tour to sketch or draw. You have to follow a guide and stay with them, but it's incredibly beautiful and one of the most photographed places in the whole region. So I'm pointing at a little speck in the water, which is a large cruise boat, giving you a sense of scale on how huge this area is. And I think I captured the water well, but I ran out of time to do the cliff. Okay, to finish the sketch tour, it's another almost finished but not finished sketch. And again, it's of an airport. It's the Las Vegas International Airport. I think it's called McCarran Airport. I can't quite remember the name. This is the plane that I could see while I was having a drink and lunch while waiting for the plane. And I could also see this background here, but the sign and the fonts, I've just added it in. This sign does exist in Las Vegas. It's pretty iconic. Lots of tourists were gathered around it to take their photograph, but it's actually right near the strip and not near the airport. But I just thought it combined well. And again, I didn't finish all of those elements, and I haven't even actually finished the plane, but it has a semi-finished feel to it. So it's not the worst thing in the world if that's how it stays. And I'm pretty happy with the general vibe of this final sketch. And if I have time, and sometimes even way later, even like at a cafe or something, if I've brought my sketchbook with me, I'll flip back and I'll touch up or finish up these sketches. But at least, you know, I've got something down and some semi-completed sketches from when I was traveling around. And maybe you've got more time to spend at locations, but I usually only have 30 minutes to an hour at each place. So thank you so much for joining me on this art adventure. I'll see you next time. Bye.